cheese. A neutral for yours. Yeah. Good dude. 25 years too. Yeah.
That's what I was like, apparently by the candles.
And I had any fun.
So I went to these first meetings we were at, and then I hired my first meeting that we drove through with
Why? Just good.
I can give you another mic test if you need. Checking 1, 2, 3, 4. Check, 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 check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Check, check, check. Keep talking a little bit. Mic test. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Check, 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 check. All right, sounds good.
There's a hat stand, coat rack. Yeah.
Well, I need to hold you up before, so you come, have a bad day. I can put on your purse. I don't even care if it's just rolling around freely in there, but it's fine.
I saw the Good morning, and thank you for joining us today as the Minnesota Department of Public Safety Office of Justice Programs recognizes landmark legislation passed 40 years ago to protect crime victims in Minnesota. That legislation being the Minnesota Crime Victim Bill of Rights. We will have 3 speakers here for you today. Suzanne Elwell is the director of our Office of Justice Programs Crime Victims Unit. We couldn't do this very important work without our partners across the state. Kelly Nicholson is a victim witness supervisor with Dakota County. And our 3rd speaker will be Billy Dinkel. He will share his story of survival from childhood sexual abuse. His lived experience is a reminder that crime knows no boundaries. He will share why it's important for crime victims to have access to meaningful services that are centered on the needs of every person. We ask that you let them speak, give their remarks, and then we'll open it up to questions at the end. With that, I'll turn the podium over to Suzanne.
Thank you, Amber. I am the director of the Crime Victim Justice Unit in the Office of Justice Programs. For nearly 20 years, I have worked to ensure that crime victims are treated appropriately and fairly by members of the criminal justice system. And most importantly, my job is to ensure that crime victim rights under the Minnesota Crime Victim Bill of Rights are upheld. These are rights that most people likely never think about and now are often taken for granted, but they weren't always the law. With the passage of the Crime Victim Bill of Rights in 1983, Minnesota was at the forefront of protecting crime victims and ensuring that their voices were heard. This landmark legislation included the right to notification during the criminal justice process, the right to restitution, and the right to notification when an offender is released from jail or prison. It also paved the way for other important rights and provisions for crime victims, including the creation of the first Crime Victim Rights Compliance Office in the country, the ability to give a crime victim impact statement at sentencing, and also enhancing statutory protections and rights to victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. It also paved the way for the creation of the Office of Justice Programs, OJP. Today, OJP currently funds services for crime victims in all 87 counties and 10 tribal reservations in Minnesota. This includes funding for 170 organizations and 6 statewide crime victim coalitions. These organizations include sexual assault programs, child advocacy centers, domestic violence shelters, legal advocacy programs, and more. Based on data that we have from over the last 5 years, we know that these programs serve over 130,000 crime victims every year, providing crucial advocacy, referral, and supports that victims need in the aftermath of a crime. In addition, within OJP is the Minnesota Crime Victim Reparations Program, which provides financial assistance to victims of violent crime to help them recover from the crime and reduce the economic impact of the crime on victims and their families. We are proud of the work that we do and stand in steadfast support of the victims who are attempting to recover from the debilitating mental, emotional, financial, and physical toll that a crime can have. We are also humbled by the work our partners do every day to assist these individuals through their worst days. With that, I'd like to introduce you to Kelly Nicholson. Kelly?
Thank you, Suzanne. Hello, I'm Kelly Nicholson. I am the supervisor of the Victim Witness Program in the Dakota County Attorney's Office. And this is Crime Victims' Rights Week, both nationally and here in the state of Minnesota, thanks to the proclamation from Governor Tim Walz. This week exists to call attention to the rights available to crime victims and to the ongoing efforts to enforce those rights throughout the criminal justice process. This week also prompts us to elevate victims' voices and fairly engage them in the legal process so they can attain justice in their case. The ugly truth is that being the victim of a crime isn't as entertaining as primetime TV dramas would make you believe. It is a traumatic experience that cannot be wrapped up in less than an hour. Being a victim of crime has long-lasting effects on a person's life. Oftentimes, many of those effects are invisible to the general public. And that's where my work and the work of many other victim service providers across the state comes into play. While it is our statutory obligation to provide court information and explanations about the criminal justice process, it is equally important that we provide empathy, support, and validation in a trauma-informed, culturally specific, and victim-centered manner. We recognize the impact of crime on a person's entire life and not just the crime event itself. Suzanne had mentioned that there are over 100,000 victims that are provided services in the state of Minnesota in a given year. In 2022, in Dakota County alone, I and the 5 amazing advocates that I work with provided services to 8,939 individuals and businesses who were impacted by crime. And again, I point out that's just one county, and there are 87 in Minnesota that have victim services programs along with the 10 tribal reservations. It is really important work, and it is difficult work that takes a toll emotionally and physically. I commend all advocates who dedicate themselves to serving others in this capacity. Support for crime victims in Minnesota has come a long way since 1983. Society is believing victims more and amplifying their voices as they bravely come forward with their stories. Our lawmakers are continuously adding legislation to achieve justice for victims. And we are actively engaging crime victims, survivors, and their family members in the court process. This is ongoing work that will not be done because we can always do better. One person who knows that all too well is Billy Dinkel, who is a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. And it is my honor to introduce you to him today.
Thank you, Kelly. My name is Billy Dinkel. I'm originally from Long Prairie, Minnesota. I grew up on a small dairy farm just west of Long Prairie. I'm a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. There were many times in my past where I wouldn't have been able to say that to you. For many years, for decades actually, I hid it. I wore a suit of armor that showed that I was a victim of nothing. It's very difficult and very heavy to carry that armor through life. And I think that there are a lot of people who you probably work with and know that can understand how difficult it is to pretend you weren't a victim or pretend you didn't suffer trauma. The summer I turned 8 years old was when the childhood sexual abuse started. My abuser's name was George Otremba. He was a mentally challenged farmhand who lived directly across the road from our farm. Our houses were probably less than 300 yards apart. It lasted until the summer I turned 13 years old, and members of my family knew that it was happening and either prayed about it or thought they could just stop it. There are experts that say if an abuser isn't held to account through the justice system, over the course of their lifetime, they can have more than 50 victims. I would be willing to say that the abuser, the person who abused me, George Otremba, probably had more than 50 victims over the course of his lifetime. And he died quite young at 48. Despite what happened to me, I managed to pretend enough in my life to grow into adulthood and attend college for a short period of time. But soon the trauma and the memories of the trauma overtook me, and I became addicted to self-medication through alcoholism and various other effects, various other addictions. I was spiraling into nothing And I knew that I had to, if I was going to live, I was going to have to get sober. You'll find that a lot of victims self-medicate through addiction, whether it's their addiction with alcohol, sex, drugs, or an addiction I'm still fighting, sugar, overeating. There is a hard business to be taken care of when you're a survivor of a sexual crime. There's a shame in our society and in our culture that the victims carry, and they carry generally by themselves. I knew that I had to sober up if I was going to live, and so I set my sights on sobering up. I had lost my way in college, I had lost my way in life, and I had lost my athletic scholarships that I had. And I knew that if I was going to accomplish the things in life that I wanted to accomplish, I needed to sober up. So step one was me sobering up. There are people in life that help you along the way when you're trying to right the ship. And I believe that what we did as a state in Minnesota in 1983 with the Victims' Bill of Rights is kind of lay a ground plan or lay a game plan for what victims need to move forward in their lives. Sobriety and living life on life's terms is very important for a victim who is self-medicating. Support, being believed. What a victim needs is to be believed as much as a perpetrator is believed. We have a innocent until proven guilty in our justice motto in our country, and victims need as much as that to be true. They need to be believed and understood. And a few years ago, we set out to remove the statute of limitations on sex crimes in Minnesota, and we accomplished that. I was a very small part of that. I appreciate the efforts of Sarah Super and Osman Muhammad, who worked very hard to pass the statute of limitations for sex crimes victims in Minnesota. And one of the most important things for victims is to be heard, not necessarily even to find justice, but just that their government will hear them, that their justice departments will listen to them and understand that they are in fact a victim and they are a first-hand witness to a serious crime. And I think the statute of limitations, removing the statute of limitations, sets that as an idea in the state of Minnesota. Do we have farther to go? We certainly have farther to go. I believe there should be a window for sex crimes, victims of sex crimes or interpersonal crimes, domestic violence, sexual assault, childhood sexual trauma. There should be a window for past survivors, for past victims also, and hopefully we'll work towards that in the future in the state of Minnesota. But the Victims' Bill of Rights certainly sets out that there are certain things that victims need and deserve from their government to move forward, in order to move forward. I didn't get legal justice for the crimes that were committed against me. Later in life, George Trimble was convicted of another sex crime with a child, second-degree criminal sexual conduct with a minor. Ironically, it took that child 2 times of reporting to get that conviction. Less than 19% of childhood sexual abusers are arrested. Let me say that again. Less than 1 in 5 childhood sexual abusers are arrested. Not convicted, arrested. The child that George was eventually convicted of criminal sexual conduct with a minor had to report twice in order for George to even be arrested. And George received, shockingly, 25 years of probation. He wasn't incarcerated. It was 25 years of probation. So you can see, based on the story and the circumstances that I bring to the table today and tell you today, that we do have a long ways to go. We are making progress. Social media has brought people together, victims together, with a voice that they have never had before. If you question that, look on Twitter. Look on Facebook. There is a unification happening with victims in the world, across the world, but in the United States especially, and in Minnesota. That is amazing, and that couldn't have happened 15 or 20 years ago. So we are making progress. Crime Victims Week it matters to have these events and to have these remembrance days and weeks and months, because it lets victims know that we're paying attention, and that the shame that they carry and that society refuses to let go of, or that forces them to carry, is actually being acknowledged. We do have a long way to go, but I do appreciate politicians and units of government that acknowledge what victims go through and that they should be remembered. I came from a family, a Catholic family in central Minnesota, where no one would ever expect that there was childhood sexual abuse happening on the farm, in front of, right under the noses of my front row in the church pew family. And my family to this day fights as hard as they can to silence me, to denounce what happened, to say they didn't know, to say it didn't happen, or it didn't happen that way, or it wasn't that bad. Those are actual quotes from members of my family who were adults when I was being abused, and others on the farm were being abused. It happened. It happens in all parts of society. I guarantee you it happens in Edina. It happens to indigenous peoples on reservations. It happens all across our state. It happens all across our country. And it's days like this, it's events like this, and it's things like the crime victims, or the Sexual Crime Victims Bill of Rights, the Crime Victims Bill of Rights, that helps to bring awareness to how common it is. My Twitter handle is 1 in 6, because it's thought that 1 in 6 boys go through sexual crime or are sexually abused before they're 18. That is nothing compared to the 1 in 3 girls that experience sexual abuse before they turn 18. 1 in 3 girls. The next time you're in a meeting, look around the room. It's ever important to understand that even if those numbers are that big, 70%, it said, do not report that crime because of the shame that's associated with standing up. I stood up at almost 50 years old and said, I'm a victim of childhood sexual abuse. It was incredibly difficult. I got the gay, are you gay now messages. I got the, are you saying you're attracted to children now messages. I got all the shaming messages. So imagine how difficult it is for someone who's not a white male in our society to stand up for themselves and say that they were a victim of a sexual crime, or any crime for that matter. Thank you for listening to my story. I appreciate it. There's an 8-year-old boy inside of me that is so thankful that you're listening to me today, and I appreciate it very, very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Billy. We truly appreciate you speaking out today and sharing your story. We'd like to open it up to questions at this time if there are any. I'd like reporters to please introduce themselves and their media outlet before asking their questions, just so we have a record.
Mara Godfrey with the Pioneer Press. Susanna, I was wondering if you have information about how much funding there is per year for the programs and services you referenced?
I couldn't rattle that off the top of my head as I'm in my Crime Victim Justice Unit role, but I could ask for assistance with that number if we can follow up with you on and really have those stats available.
Jen, just want to check to make sure there's nothing online. Okay, Billy and the rest of our speakers will be available afterwards if you have any other follow-up questions that you'd like. This this media event will live at the link that was provided to you all in the media advisory. And if you have any other questions that you need follow-up on, feel free to reach out to me. Thank you. Okay.
Those photos were there, you were assuming how old were you? So first one,